It's about customer value.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, because human society is not going to disappear in 10 years, right? In fact, it will never disappear. So it's about that's why I'm a huge believer in augmented intelligence as opposed to artificial in the true sense. So for me, it's really about how are we going to advance human capability in solving the problems, which means now the problems we are solving, we probably haven't even thought about them yet.
Welcome to the Trailblazers podcast, presented by BST Global, where we feature the visionaries who are shaping the AEC industry of the future. My name is Javier Baldor, Chief Executive Officer at BST Global, and your host. Today I'm joined by Shankar Kalyana, Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Stantec. Welcome, Shankar.
Thank you, Javier. Thanks for hosting me. Glad to be here.
Honored to have you with us. If you'd be kind enough to introduce us to Stantec and tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
No, absolutely. So Stantec are a 60-plus year architecture, engineering, and consulting construction industry in a firm, focused around really the natural and built environment, and just designing with communities in mind always. And I joined, Stantec's glorious heritage actually as their first chief technology officer, leading the digital agenda for Stantec just a few months ago. And I was with IBM, prior to that, and it was just a great moment for me to come and join Stantec and lead the sustainability revolution that we have and the challenge that we have in our industry. So just excited to be part of this great journey. So.
Well, I'll start with this. Made a great choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Stantec is an unbelievable firm, tremendous reputation. So outstanding choice. You bring multi-decades of experience in digital transformation. A fellow at IBM. You're too humble, so I'll say it for you. Really excited to hear in a few moments your take on emerging technologies and the like, but maybe share a little bit more about your personal story in terms of how you got here. There's a journey, there's a story there always, and maybe if you mind sharing with our audience, please.
No, absolutely. There's actually a extended Cliff Notes version of my lifelong story somewhere on YouTube, LinkedIn somewhere. But I have been in the computing industry. I'm a math and physics, graduate, but do not ask me about calculus. I'll suck at it. But I grew up in India, in a small town, in the deep south of India, and was a math and physics graduate. Actually wanted to be an astrophysicist, back when I was in college, but clearly, life had other plans for me. And it was one of those, crazy advertisements that come out saying, here's a company looking for systems analysts. And these were the days when nobody knew what it was. And, it was something very exciting. We just knew it was computers. So my brother actually, pointed that out to me and said, maybe you should apply for that. And long, process, of written exams and entrance exams and interviews and all that. So I was one of the first batch of 80, people in those days, back in the 80s, that joined this company called CMC, which surprisingly enough, was the remnants of IBM when IBM had actually left India back in the 70s. So in a strange way, my career began with IBM, and I did not know that, right? Because I grew up in the IBM culture, the IBM systems, IBM lingo. It was just a great journey. And then in the last 38 years, I've gone through, pretty much every inflection point of playing different roles in the software spectrum, and been through every one of those inflection points, pre-internet to post-internet to now. I think we are in the AI and cloud era. So I've been through all of that. But so in the last 23 years when I was at IBM, my primary mission and then really a passion was really around designing complex systems. I mean, complexity always interested me because scale and complexity, simple things, people do pretty well, but when it comes to big systems, systems of systems, complexity, they're off in all levels, right? Whether it's geographical dispersion, technological complexity, the number of people, the cultures you have to work with, all the conflicts and constraints you have to manage with. These always were the bigger challenges, and I was always fascinated by them. And so, in a sense, that's how I ended up eventually leading a lot of the cloud and digital transformation agenda. Within IBM, working for some of our biggest clients, and I had to, get a fork in the road to say, hey, am I continuing this mission in IBM, or I'm actually going to do that elsewhere? And it had to be something extremely, extremely, rewarding. And I think the universe has blessed me to the point where I say, what I was seeking, which is a challenge that is really impactful to society, applying everything I knew about technology to that sphere, and a company that's got some great values, that I really shared. That triangulation is just, too perfect for me to pass up. So here I am,
There you
so
go.
leading the agenda for Stantec. So yeah.
Well, I'll start by saying your brother gave you a great steer.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Yes, he
I
did.
mean, that's a great great steer, and maybe talk about the road ahead. You've got this tremendous domain experience, tremendous resume. How do you see the way forward at Stantec? What are you most excited about? Where will you begin? Because I know you've made this transition in recent months. Maybe share with us a little bit of insight on that.
Yeah. So let me see if I can abstract that just a bit out, before we talk about Stantec specifically, because Stantec is still an exemplar in the broader AEC industry. To some sense, digital and digital transformation has really, reached the shores of many other industries, right? Much faster than it has reached AEC. It's not to say digitization has not been part of AEC. I mean, when CAD hit the AEC industry back like 30 years ago, clearly we were on the beginnings of the digital journey. But I think most people in the AEC industry have looked at that as a tool that you use not to replace anything, not to anything. And I think that's the right philosophy, because you want to look at that as an augmentation of capability, not a replacement of capability. But with that said, what we have not done yet at scale is a reimagination of how we do work in the AEC industry. And that to me is, I think, the distinction between how we have pursued things to date to where we're actually headed, right? Because when we start thinking of work through that lens, and every question, everything we do, not because technology is available, but really rethinking in terms of, how do you do design? How do you actually, because it's always about customer value, it's about speed, time to value, it's always about that. And we have to question everything. And then we find that, well, guess what? Things that could have been difficult maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because ideas were there, but the technology was not mature enough. Well, today we are at a very, very different inflection point of that maturity. So that to me is the promise. I think when we stop working on the fringes of, just, okay, what is a new idea we can go develop and digitize, and start thinking in terms of how do we really change the way your complex program is actually structured and delivered. How is the life of an architect change? How is the life of an engineer change and a designer change? I think that opens up all kinds of avenues, right? So that to me is what's really exciting about it, because this is an industry that's right at the cusp of adopting it at scale. And I'm just so fortunate to be part of the journey.
That's super exciting. You're not kidding. You like big challenges.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. I mean,
but that notion, and I think that maybe the word I'm looking for is mindset, is so important, because many of us get caught up into iterative improvements and taking and augmenting, as you well said. But reimagination is hard. What are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over the years, or, what are some of the steps that you've either at IBM, or, over What have you seen work as you approach this reimagination now at Stantec? What are the ingredients? What is the pillars that will help bring that to life?
Great question. Just too many things, but let me maybe start talked about three things, right? Clearly, one is leadership. I think transformation doesn't succeed of any kind of philosophy without the embrace, not just support, but I think it's a conviction. There's a lot of conviction behind that embrace, from a leadership standpoint. And sometimes it's prone because of, you have to deal with it because of competitive pressures. Other times you want to take a leap forward. Regardless of the trigger, I think, that leadership, really, really matters. Because, transformation at this scale is change management. And without the leadership support, change management, which is the second aspect of it, really, really is difficult, right? And the third facet is we are right in saying these are big ideas and big themes, but I think it's very important that we don't chew them off in one fell swoop, right? I mean, that's where increments come into play, because I think we need to have vision and conviction of that strategy, but it's totally okay to take them in value increments, right? And the key again is value, because I always use the bell curve as an exemplar to talk about. In every organization, you got 20% on the right-hand side who are just hungry for change, and they will be the change agents for you. And on the left 20%, well, guess what? They're not necessarily going to be the agents of change. And the middle 60% are watching. They're hungry for it. They just don't know what it means to them, and they're waiting to see something in life. So what you want to show is use that first 20% to create change, show value, and then convince the next 20%, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes a very...
an evangelize.
So you really got to, look at it both in terms of scale increments as well as value increments, right? I mean, that's how... So that's the three things I would say. There are many more, but yeah, these three would what I find as key recipes for transformation of any scale here, right? So,
well said. What are you most excited in terms of the this AI this AI era that is generational? These are types of things that the internet of the early '90s or even earlier. AI now that we're stepping into, what use cases stand out to you? Which ones do you say, wow, this is where we're going to plant the first seeds, this is where we're going to get directionally behind? What are those use cases for you to share with our audience?
Actually, the keyword that you used is actually use cases, right? Because one of the things that we have generally done with technology is technologists love technology. I mean, they just love playing around with it. They want to apply it, and they're looking for the hammer and then look for the nail, right? That's how technology generally is. But in this specific case, there are two things really come to mind. One is, to your point, AI is, I've been, watching it, observing it, learning it, working with it, for a couple of decades. But really the last, I would say, 5 years of when, it's really taken the exponential curve. And of course, with generative AI, it's just taken on a whole different dimension of capturing the imagination of anybody. In fact, at Stantec, not a day goes by without us getting an idea about, hey, how about doing this problem with AI, right? I mean, that's how the questions always come in. So the use cases, really, we have to look at them through the lens of the two value drivers. One is, how do you change customer experience, and how do you change employee experience, right? So the personas really matter, and you're looking at, how do you actually change them from the standpoint of reimagination we talked about, right? So if you take the employee side, I mean, the classic things are always there. How do you do an HR chatbot that replaces 90 to 94% of the functions that you normally do? And I'm not talking level one. We're talking insanely deeper analysis questions that people have about very personalized and contextual, and that's really the power of it, right? So you can reimagine the HR experience beyond the normal, hey, how many vacation days do I have? This is something that's extremely personalized to the benefits dimension, for example, right? So there, if you talk about IT operations, AI ops has been around now for at least like I would say 5 to 8 years. Where we have just reimagined the massive amounts of data that we collect, event based at all levels of the stack, and now thinking beyond the IT infrastructural level, but really thinking of it to the full stack of the solution, and understanding and predicting, what this business process is actually going to fail. And by the way, let me mitigate that for you ahead of time, right? That the level of the ability for us to do those kinds of things today, as opposed to what we were able to do 5 years ago, is immensely different, right? So there are like random, employee experiences across the board. If you take a customer experience, I mean, clearly, whether it is around, how design automation, how we can do generative designs, not just from the standpoint of saying, well, I can, put in a bunch of parameters and come up with a complex design, but really how do you personalize them? And how many different choices you can make. And now we can combine that with digital twins and think of this as, well, I'm not even thinking day two, in the entire design process is changing. I can visualize, create, and simulate the entire experience before I put a single, ounce of cement out on the ground, right? It's a
Stunning.
very, very different, way of how we were going to imagine things. And guess what it's going to do? It's eventually going to transform, how consumption occurs in the public sphere. I think the budgetary pressures we used to have that said, well, here is a $6 billion project that we are going to span over the next 8 years, and the cost overrun reaches $30 billion. It's a very different landscape now that you're able to really affect how the consumption patterns change, spending patterns change. So that's really where the reimagination choices are, and that's exactly why this is such a powerful moment for us, right? Because the opportunity is endless, but we have to be very, very, very thoughtful about applying them to, again, going back to the value statement, right? I mean, we can play around, but let's pick the ones where there's immense value and figure out how to apply them.
Fascinating. I love this notion of the reimagination.
Yeah.
And really putting your, your head above the water and looking forward and thinking differently about how things could be and
Yeah.
should be, perhaps. So I love that stream. What time horizon do you think that this vision that you're speaking to, this reimagination, years? What do you see at Stantec, and perhaps more broadly for the industry, companies like yourself that are leaning in, leading the way, will set the pace? So what are we talking about here?
Well, some of it is already occurring, Javier. I mean, it's not. I mean, companies. There are companies, including Stantec, who are obviously dabbling in some of these areas. But I see this is a matter of the next 3 to 5 years. I think we're going to see some, market movement, especially in some of the spaces we talked about. Employee experience, it's like BAU now. I mean, if you don't do these things as a company, I think we're already left behind, right? So I think changing employee experience is that's not
table stakes. Would you say?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, absolutely. We have to worry about. We have to do that. Changing the customer experience in some of these areas, I think we are on a multi-month, few-year journey. It is not a decade, right?
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the implications of scale and all that will happen over a period of time. And then here comes in 10 more years another technology that's going to shake us. So, and then we're worried about that. But I do believe this moment is a sustained moment, and we're going to start seeing value at this kind of dramatic scale in the next 3 to 5 years. And for all I know, I may be underrepresenting that, right? Because I was wrong about how fast AI would come to market. I thought it would take a few years, and I was wrong, right? So I could be wrong about this too. So,
well, you talk about the passion you have, the challenge, the move towards Stantec. Clearly, Stantec has focused on sustainability. What do you think and believe that AI holds in terms of promise of solving this challenge of challenges? Climate change. This is mankind. This is our Earth. So, what do you think the promise is for AI on those scale of complex challenges? Either at Stantec as you're shaping that and leading that way, but perhaps for our industry as a collective.
Yeah. So there are two dimensions to this. One, I think, addressing new problems create new problems, right? So it opens up the aperture dramatically. So I think as we start exploring this area, there are going to be newer areas emanating on where we can address. But the broader value is going to come from data. Because I think with AI, the if we step back and look at, so why is AI such a promising thing? It really is about, you can put 100 million humans in a room and say, go at it and solve this problem, right? Yeah, I mean, we can probably get something out of it, but it'll be a very difficult proposition. So it's almost like, getting 1 million humans into a room and actually feeding them the data and saying, let's go through massive processing of it. Let's discern patterns. Let's figure out newer domains of even problems we haven't uncovered. So the ability to, really look at this through the data lens, and, when you think about neural networks at that level, that to me is where the promise is, right? So for me, in there is also the danger, as we always talk about, and I know we will talk more about it, in different perspectives, through the summit. But the interesting that always comes out is, unlike the internet, which was truly an augmentation of human capability, yes, it displaced labor and so on and so forth, but it didn't really have the kind of dangers at the levels we're talking about. I think AI has a different, because it's literally mimicking what humans can do or believing they can do. There is obviously a lot of responsibility we have in being able to use it properly, but the promise is just endless, right? I mean, we have to be optimists about it, but use it responsibly, right?
So you talk about reimagining, the employee experience, the client experience. How about reimagining the business, right?
Yeah,
and what you're really leaning into, as I'm inferring, is a data business.
Yeah.
A data first company, in every respect. Am I paraphrasing correct?
No, I think it's a great paraphrasing, because in a sense, we've always wanted to be data-driven decision making, right? I mean, that's kind of the promise behind a lot of these things. But there are now two things happening. One is the fact that the amount of data that we're using, the type of data we are using to be able to make those decisions has completely, that paradigm has shifted. Second is, I think we are moving from a sense and respond era to a predict and preempt era, right? Very different, mindset about this stuff. But fundamentally, yeah, it's always about, it's not just decision making reactively, it's about decision making in a very, very proactive fashion, right? Because your early warning system is not about early warning in a matter of minutes or days. Sometimes it can even be like, you know where the patterns are.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So yeah.
Well, you have this tremendous perspective spanning multiple decades. You were right there at the forefront of it at IBM with many of these deep learning and Watson and all those things, I imagine. I'm going to go out 5-10 years. This is what I've been asking my guests here on the podcast. And what does it look like? What does it feel like for this industry? What do you see? You have a tremendous perspective. That it's well grounded in tremendous expertise on a variety of fronts, digital transformations and beyond. So what do you see?
Well, I'm going to be insanely incorrect because it's about the future. But hey, we got to have a go at it, right? No, I think so. On one hand, we can think of this: wow, the whole thing is transformed entirely. But I think when we think of it through the lens, what does transformation really mean? At the end of the day, it's still about some of the things we just talked about. It's about customer value. Mm-hmm. It's about because businesses, the human society is not going to disappear in 10 years, right? In fact, it will never disappear. So it's about how. That's why I'm a huge believer in augmented intelligence as opposed to artificial in the true sense. So for me, it's really about how are we going to advance human capability in solving the problems, which means now the problems we are solving, we probably haven't even thought about them yet, right? It's a very different class of problems we're solving, right? The type of data that we are probably gathering is probably, we're not even touched that yet, right? The third is, I think, employee expectations of things what they're imagining as, wow, it's out in the future. Clearly, most of them are going to be reality. They're table stakes, right, in some of these cases. But definitely there's going to be a fourth technology. I mean, I think the other thing we always talk about is, at least I don't know about 8 to 10 years, but clearly in the next 3 to 5 years, I see this, the emergence has already occurred around, for example, in AI. It is such an expensive proposition, to do that. I mean, we talk about sustainability, but to run AI, it takes a lot of computing to do that, and that's extremely, power consuming. So, how do you get to federated AI, quote unquote, right? Which is AI at the edge, so which means, you're running the models and the data wherever it matters and you're distributing the heck out of it. So it becomes much more of a different paradigm. So that's already starting. The intersection of AI with quantum computing, right, which is a whole different arena, that thing is going to come into play. So there are some newer technologies going to shape how we think about it, but at the end of the day, it's all going to come down to, are we solving the problems that people care about? And are we, creating value to the businesses that are really investing in it? And is society advanced enough to be able to say, well, you know what, we have taken on sustainability, we did some, good things with it. And by the way, now we have better handle on climate change as opposed to what we did 10 years before, right? So, yeah.
Well, we'll look back.
Yes, we will.
In a few 5 years' time,
Yeah.
we'll look back at this and fascinating sentiments.
Yeah.
Honored to have you on our podcast. Thank you for sharing your vision and strategies and this whole notion of reimagination. Fantastic challenge for us all. So thank you, Shankar.
Absolutely.
Wish you and Stantec much continued success as you lead the way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Javier.
And thank you all for joining us on this segment of the Trailblazers podcast. Until next time, all the best and take care.